the most famous American gangster in living memory, the modern day Al Capone, the man that was larger than life.
You guys in Giuliani should be in church.
John Gotti.
I love behaviors.
Welcome to Mobflix Friday, as we compare the two Gotti movies, 1996 versus 2018.
And I made it to the top.
As inspired by our colleague over at Mob Mondays.
Movie Tuesdays, Mob Movie Wednesdays, Mob Movie Mondays.
Mobflix Friday, the hottest joint in town. How do these two movies compare, and which one is better? Yeah, I wonder.
You're never gonna see another guy like me.
Shut the up for a minute, I'm trying to make a point.
The 1996 classic TV movie starring Assante and Anthony Quinn, or the 2018 one starring a 60-year-old Tony Manero and some kid who looks like a Brazilian football player. Gotti 1996, the HBO TV movie loosely based on the book Gotti Rise and Fall by true crime journalist Jerry Capecci, and Gotti 2018, the barely theatrical mess, supposedly based on the book Gotti in the Shadow of My Father, the sort of puff piece autobiography of cinematic genius John Gotti Jr.
You can move on with your life, you can change.
The first movie done as good a job as a high-budget TV movie could do. Great performances from Anthony Quinn and Assante.
Let's take it on a f***ing cokehead.
Be quiet! Hey, you shut up! You just listen.
And at least felt like it was filmed on location in New York City. Second movie was a disaster.
It's gonna be the way I say it's gonna be.
It had been talked about since 2010, with Sylvester Stallone attached to the project, then more seriously with John Travolta attached. Not to mention Barry Levinson, Al Pacino, Joe Pesci, Nick Cassavetes, and Lindsay Lohan. Gotti Jr., to its detriment, was involved with the production. Yeah, like he's Spielberg.
Junior Gotti, this kid is a zero.
In the end, almost a decade later, an awful movie in the Handycam style was released, minus every big name attached except Travolta, with Botox and a toupee. 1996 Gotti was like an HBO TV movie prelude to The Sopranos. Unpretentious, competent, and entertaining. 2018 Gotti looks like a film school project filmed on an iPhone 6. Pretentious, incompetent, and unentertaining. And that's putting it very, very mildly. So first off, let's just deal with the recent monstrosity before we can look back at the good movie from 1996. Let's be honest, this movie only ever got proposed and eventually made, barely, because John Gotti Jr. got out of jail after retiring from the life and just didn't want to get a job. Like, realistically, what's he gonna do? Work in a pizzeria in Ozone Park? The man doesn't want to work.
You can move on with your life, you can change.
And thus, we ended up with a case of life imitating art and not the other way around, where a second-generation mobster couldn't handle being a mob boss but wanted the glamour and adulation of being a quote filmmaker. How could The Sopranos in 2006 depict and prognosticate what would actually be in the 2010s? Who knows? But they did. John Gotti Jr. being the real-life basis of fictional Little Carmine Lupatazzi.
Will I be as effective as a boss like my dad was? A film has many parents.
Who would embark on the crusade of a film production vanity project.
All the movies from the 90s never quite actually depicted John.
All the delusions of grandeur from Jr. about the other Gotti pictures didn't do the man's core essence justice, but mine will. In the end, after almost a decade, and all the smiles and premature celebrating had dried up, the 96 Gotti picture is superior in every sense. Assante is closer to the actual Gotti, as opposed to the guy from Swordfish. Everyone else looks like they were just randomly picked up off the street and asked, "Oi mate, do you want to be in a movie?" Aside from the guy from American History X. 10 plus years ago, when director Nick Cassavetes was attached, full of optimism, and said he didn't just want a "and then this happened, and then that happened" picture. Which is exactly what we got, with a soundtrack as dreadful as everything else in the movie. Oh, who? Connie Francis, Frankie Valli, Leon and the Belmonts? No, Pitbull.
You live to be 5,000.
The music isn't even in the period the movie's set in. TJ Finance. A shut up, man. Real recognize real. They got Pitbull to appeal to the forever young millennial generation. Gotti was way too hotty. Pitbull relates to the generation that grew up with the yay.
And the white man get paid off for all of that.
Real recognize. That music had no business in a Gotti period film, and you ain't even from this era. I can see the future. I bloody go away, TJ. This movie casted Travolta, known for On His Day being in movies with some of the best motion picture soundtracks of all time. John Travolta, the guy you associate with great music in film.
sway to the music.
5,000.
Travolta is playing a 60-year-old Tony Manero as John Gotti, and not even a Saturday Night Fever Tony Manero either, staying alive Tony Manero. In terms of fruitiness and campiness, once Travolta and Stallone were attached to this project 11 years ago, I knew, this picture's in trouble. The last time these two were connected to the same project, the result was a Saturday Night Fever sequel in the form of an early mid-80s Jane Fonda exercise movie.
This is a dance for a bloody circus!
And Staying Alive was a Jane Fonda exercise movie. That was some fruity shit. Years later, Gotti 2018 is the residual fruit from the fruitiness. Only all the juice has dried up. All of it.
I'll park a bus up your ass sideways.
You're never gonna see another guy like me.
Who would have thought the director of Staying Alive, Judge Dredd, would have had his brother play the superior Gotti?
You betray the law!
Law is designed for the rats by the rats.
Down to whatever reason, Travolta was permanently attached to this project, so Gotti Jr. assumed no matter how badly this project suffers, from names dropping off, lack of financing, etc., I'm onto a winner. I've got the ace of spades up my sleeve. Yeah, I got this.
In the 70s and 80s, who wasn't a John Travolta fan? Who wasn't?
Vinnie Barbarino, Tony Manero, Bud Davis, Vincent Vega, Chili Palmer, yeah, I've got this. I'll get to sit in my ass and the rest will be history. The Oscars are on me. Yeah, The Godfather, Goodfellas, those pictures were good, but this will be the real accurate story of the Dapper Don, you see? Who was a man's man, which was most important, you see? Right? Wrong. If the real John Gotti was this larger-than-life, super slick crime boss, Travolta, the man in Saturday Night Fever and Pulp Fiction, is the relatable slick goof, not the guy who's slick through and through. In Saturday Night Fever, he's the dude who starts off cool, but ends up friend-zoned by the older gold digger loser chick who lives in an apartment an older sugar daddy pays for. In Urban Cowboy, he's the Texan young buck who wifeys up the sassy BPD type chick who goes off with the horrid older convict dude from Training Day. He only gets her back in the end. In Pulp Fiction, he's the dude who leaves the Uzi with the world's largest silencer next to the toaster and Pop-Tarts to take a shit, only for Bruce Willis to exterminate the living daylights out of him. Butch may die hard, but Travolta dies easy. Again, cool mixed with goof, and to be absolutely fair, I'm giving the man his credit. That performance, it was on TV in autumn 97, bruv. Everyone in school was going crazy the next day after seeing that. My first one-on-one experience with a girl, a week later after Pulp Fiction was on TV, I tried so badly to be like Travolta in Pulp Fiction. Smoking his roll-up at the diner with Uma Thurman. I bought the weed to try and emulate Travolta because he's the more relatable 75% cool and 25% goof. His cool being more obtainable to a regular kid. His career had been up and down since the 80s. Tarantino rejuvenated his ass in the 90s. Then again, by the 2000s, he'd lost his mojo. This is a man who on his day is a very talented star, but at the same time, he's a sensitive type whose confidence is fleeting. By 2018, he just compensates for losing his mojo by overacting and puts on a tough guy face, something the real John Gotti didn't need to do.
You do not have to put a face to look odd. If you have to put a face, you're not that way.
You had John Travolta as John Gotti. If it means you had the guy from Staying Alive and the Look Who's Talking trilogy, it does. If it means you had the guy from Saturday Night Fever and Pulp Fiction, it don't. Now that's a hard motherfucking fact of life to deal with, but that's a fact of life your ass is gonna have to deal with. The original Good Gotti movie was that of 1996. Gotti 96 hits the mark where the others don't due to its casting and source material. That's right, it's source material. If you love this mafia stuff, the original guy to hands-on cover Gotti, even way back in the 80s, was true crime journalist Jerry Capecci. And after Gotti's well-documented conviction in 92, he co-authored the book Gotti Rise and Fall, which is what Gotti 96 is partly based on. And finally, Capecci. He was the original guy to put the mob online back in 96 with his historical website ganglandnews.com, which I've been looking at since late 98, bruv. Before all this Gravano, Francesi, whoever doing podcasts, was Capecci putting the mafia on the internet. In essence, that's the difference between the two movies. One is the man behind the scenes, the original expert journalist on the New York underworld. The other, the real-life Carmine Lupatazzi with delusions of grandeur, John Gotti Jr. The whole feel of quote-unquote authentic New York Cosa Nostra depictions comes from that source. In this film, hardly anyone is fictionalized. Carlo Gambino is Carlo Gambino. Paul Castellano is Paul Castellano, etc. Anthony Quinn as Gambino family underboss Neil Della Croce is what adds cinematic weight to an otherwise TV movie.
You break the rules in this whole goddamn thing of ours. Cracks and crumbles.
Is that what you want?
What's the matter? What the I want?
Around the time, he was doing a bunch of New York Italian depictions in the twilight of his career.
Marriage to her would have been hell. Dog shit, horse shit, big shit.
Quinn's depiction is clearly closer to You Can't Kill Paul Castellano because the boss is the boss.
John, you cannot work out a boss.
Nostra means that the boss is your boss. Understand?
Whereas the dude from American History X is saying you can't kill the boss while I'm alive. But if you were to do it, you gotta do A, B, and C.
Fall out of the way.
The boss is your boss.
If anybody's getting clipped here, it's gonna be Paul. We're gonna do a real hit.
Assante as Gotti himself? Well, let's just start with the fact he's age appropriate. He's in his 40s more or less, playing a guy in his 40s more or less. Not a Travolta in his 60s with Botox and a wig, playing a guy in his 40s and even 30s in some scenes. Assante, I remember from Judge Dredd and Striptease, as a direct no-nonsense persona, a warmth where necessary.
So you made a mistake a lot of river girls make today. You married a bum. I think it's all gonna work out.
Which is what he brings to Gotti.
It's really good to be treated as a friend. Hey, you are a friend. And Sammy G's a friend.
He's the dominant alpha.
I love that guy.
Even in Striptease, I was like, I swear Demi Moore should hook up with this NY cigar smoking detective type.
You want to make it up to me?
I beg your pardon?
Because he's solid. However, making him married, the writer might have helped him dodge a bullet on that one, not romantically saving the damsel in distress, i.e. the stripper who's a single mum. So he might not be as jazzy as Travolta, but he has a basic aura of presence and strength that works for the role of the Dapper Don.
You know, I always feel good.
Something I'm not too sure Travolta ever had, especially by the 2010s. The rebellious street gangster with his old-time mentor Quinn as Della Croce.
What do you want me to do? You want me to blow the fuck out right now?
The sinister Forsyth as Sammy Gravano.
Nick's my brother-in-law, he's my embarrassment.
You know something, Mickey? You were some whiner. I was your underboss and I was out there whacking guys for you. If I talk, I walk.
As opposed to the guy they got for the 2018 film. Assante's chemistry with both actors made this a surprisingly good TV movie back when I saw it in '98 on video.
The true life story of John Gotti.
William DeMeo as Gravano.
This is a society of brothers.
Other than the fact he's been trying to be famous since the 90s.
They're gonna give John Travolta $20 million for his next picture.
I look like Al Pacino.
No comment, bruv. Vinny Pastore, aka Big Pussy, from The Sopranos, as Gotti's number 2 guy, Angelo Quack Quack Ruggiero. He looks like the real dude. He comes off like a guy who's known John all his life.
So you think we're going back to Lewisburg?
You're thinking.
How do you get caught on the book? That's why I called you Quack Quack.
There's good friends of mine on the stage.
He's the boss.
Well, he's the boss. You have to do what he tells you.
Hey, John, I gotta talk to you private for a minute.
Put out the f***ing cigarettes and see a doctor.
Whereas in the 2018 movie, it's literally some guy they found off the street.
I know.
No, you do not know.
What are you talking about?
Gotti 96 itself, its best parts for me is the first part, the rise of the man to the proverbial throne of the New York-based Gambino crime family. This was the most accurate depiction of the New York Mafia in the 70s and 80s, hierarchy and structure-wise. Lastly, in Gotti 96, in terms of the inaccuracies, having Sammy Gravano be the one who takes matters into his own hands and kills John Favara, the civilian neighbor of John Gotti, who accidentally ran over and killed Gotti's son Frank. It's a false narrative for sure, but it's certain and concise in its depiction. Let's blame the guy who became a government informant. Gotti said it's an accident, but Gravano kills him anyway because he's sinister, setting him up for his eventual sinister betrayal. Whereas Gotti 2018, with this hinted at innuendo stuff, showing wife Victoria Gotti is distraught, but not saying she actually pushed to have the neighbor John Favara whacked.
I think he was goaded into that by his wife, drove him f***ing nuts.
Gotti just gives his guys a look, hint hint. That's what I like about Gotti 96. They don't focus much on the Gotti family and wife Victoria, which is a whole thing in and of itself.
John and his wife, I know John had a lot of trouble with her. She was driving him insane.
She's just there in the background. At the funeral, she's distraught, but as any mother would be, not as a vengeful BPD type would be. Gotti 2018, they cast Travolta's actual wife in real life, Kelly Preston, presumably to mirror the real life John and Vicky Gotti's tempestuous, tumultuous, amour faux, whatever relationship.
No fall or whatever.
R.I.P. to Kelly Preston, but the chemistry between Travolta and Preston is so bad.
Our son is a tiger.
But did they tell the truth? Oh, that's so bad.
Gotti 96 doesn't waste energy trying to depict something as specific and complex as an amour faux tumultuous relationship. Just a to-the-point, accurate New York Cosa Nostra movie that doesn't punch above its weight or bite off more than it can chew. John Gotti was born in 1940 in the Bronx, possibly in the Williamsbridge neighborhood or possibly somewhere in the South Bronx.
Why don't you just behave yourself? I'm behaving myself. You're not behaving yourself.
Fifth of 13 children in an Italian-American family originating from Santa Agata di Gotti outside Naples, Italy. In the early 1950s, the family moved around until settling in East New York, Brooklyn, near the border with Queens. Gotti, in his teens, a gang member and teenage delinquent, dropped out of Franklin K. Lane High School in Brooklyn at age 16 to pursue a life of crime that would eventually lead to the ultimate position in the New York Mafia, boss.
The boss is your boss.
Boss.
The modern-day rags-to-riches story of a Jimmy Cagney Al Capone type who would become a New York City celebrity in the mid-late 80s doesn't seem to be going anywhere soon, despite the accurate and wannabe accurate movie depictions.
Gorgeous, the handsome man.
The Dapper Don, the throwback to a time when men were men's men, the family man, the ladies' man, the wise guy who quote-unquote looked like Tony Curtis with muscles. For whatever reason, this is the modern-day American mafioso who has captured the public's imagination of the sexy outlaw.
You guys in Giuliani should be in church.
The man who came from nothing and refused to play by the rules of a system against him from day one. In reality, Gotti played by his own rules, and those who got in his way suffered the consequences, at least for a period of time. The man behind the myth was a gang leader, criminal crew leader, and mafia family leader who would plan murders, manipulate and maneuver both foe and friend, promote and punish both foe and friend, rob, steal, and drug deal.
John Gotti, he had to kill you in a heartbeat.
Hey, shoots in a f***ing hot minute like that.
Listen to me, fella. Now listen. Sever your fucking head.
The consummate charmer. Those who met him from the non-criminal world seem to have nothing but praise for the man.
Do you know John Gotti?
Yes, I do.
You know what friends are for? To support you when you're in trouble.
Lottie Dottie from John Gotti.
Those from the criminal world who opposed his killing of a boss to become a boss would have fewer good things to say about him and wanted him dead.
He made himself boss. He was no boss. He didn't know that he sealed his own death warrant at that time.
His love of the public's attention, in part, would be his own downfall. Personally, I believe as a man, his real life story was fascinating. As a mobster, he was both underestimated and overestimated. As a human, he was obviously morally compromised, if not morally bankrupt. His ego was both his doing and his eventual undoing.
That he's a gangster, not an actor.
Life without parole, he laughs.
He helped bring the Gambino crime family down to a lower level than it had been.
Jerry Capecci, Ernest Folkman, and others in the news media had made John Gotti a star from the 80s through the 90s. You had daughter Victoria doing a reality TV series Growing Up Gotti.
Where is the youngest son? He was like, yeah. I don't want to hear. Oh, I got one here.
It's disgusting and it's uncool.
Featuring her 3 misbehaving teenage sons.
Who used this jab?
Well, it obviously wasn't me that took it, was it? Also, son, John Gotti Jr., before trying to beat George Lucas, was initially being perceived as a bodybuilding brute type.
John Jr., the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. This moron is going around with a band of thugs who are hooked into weightlifting and steroids, shaking down bars.
The inspiration for the character Tino Zapati, the mob boss nephew and thug in film City Hall, and the inspiration for Nicolas Cage, the son of a mob boss character in the Kiss of Death remake movie. Like, that was the perception back then, the boss's reckless son or steroid type. Then after coming out of jail and renouncing, quote, the life, he's now trying to be some philosophical, articulate wannabe filmmaker.
His charismatic charm, his intelligence, his mannerisms.
Again, the real-life embodiment of fictional Sopranos character Little Carmine Lupatazzi.
Mellifluous box.
You like the way that word sounds? How it flows on your tongue?
My thing with Junior Gotti is he was the beneficiary of mob nepotism and thus happy to be a crime boss if it meant delegate to criminal subordinates and get paid for the privilege. When it meant no, you have to do some hard time in jail, all of a sudden he comes to the realization crime is bad and now wants to make movies accurately depicting what a man's man his father was.
But he was also a man's man, which is most important.
Bro, we've already heard the Gotti story many times before, thank you. In terms of the daughter, going on TV with her sons, on the one hand, she was milking it, putting her boys on the telly. On the other hand, she's kind of alright and a half decent woman. She comes off as maternal rather than just matriarchal to her credit. Basically, I prefer when she has something to say other than, my dad was a big bad gangster.
My father is the last of the Mohicans.
Which unfortunately isn't all too often, I'm afraid.
John Gotti this, John Gotti that, John Gotti. People treat him like he was the second coming of Christ.
As opposed to Rosanna Scotto, a news anchor in her own right for years on Fox News, grandniece of mob boss Albert Anastasia, who Gotti looked up to as a teenager, and daughter of mob capo Anthony Scotto, also granddaughter of mob capo Tough Tony Anastasia.
You see, when a man is no stealing, and men are not taking no kickback.
However, this woman has a real job.
I know you will make the 10 o'clock news a better place.
She doesn't need to milk the shit out of her family's criminal past persistently and indefinitely.
John Gotti this, John Gotti that, John Gotti.
Will you f***ing stop?
The first Gotti movie was born out of old school on-the-ground journalism and a great collaborative effort in terms of production and casting, a prelude to one of the greatest shows in terms of HBO content. The second was born out of family nepotism and a media fixation stroke intrigue with John Gotti. The end result speaks for itself. Travolta, years past it and devoid of a mojo, gives an all-time career low. Assante, in his prime, gives an all-time career high. The real Gotti's true story, more prevalent in the true crime genre online and in books, as opposed to the medium of film. You've been watching Mobflix Friday, the hottest joint in town. If you made it this far, well, thank you very much. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.
In the 70s and 80s, who wasn't a John Travolta fan? Who wasn't? We're going to have the ability to write history correctly and accurately.
That guy they shot in the bar, he didn't even shoot him. That's what was in the movie, but that's not true.
And accurately. It'll be very successful.